Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Cokeland, The Secret History of Coke Industries and Corporate Power in America by Christopher Leonard. This is from the preface. On May 18th, 1981, 4 Wall Street bankers traveled to Wichita, Kansas. They went there to make an offer to Charles Koch, the CEO of an obscure mid-size energy company. The bankers from Morgan Stanley wanted to convince Koch to take his family's company public, offering shares for sale on the New York Stock Exchange. Their deal was squarely in line with the conventional wisdom of corporate America at the time. Going public was seen as a natural progression for companies like Koch Industries, offering them access to big pools of money and promising enormous paydays for the existing team of executives. All it required from the CEO was to surrender control. Morgan Stanley, in return, would collect a small fortune in fees. Charles Koch was 45 years old. He had run Koch Industries since he was 32 when his father died suddenly. He was trim, tall, and had an athlete's build. He spoke quietly in meetings and seemed almost passive. The bankers laid out their plan to take Koch public. They revealed what, to most executives at least, might have been the most significant detail. If Charles Koch agreed to the deal, he could earn $20 million overnight. The bankers seemed incredulous when they prepared a confidential memo about Koch's reaction. "He does not want this cash," the memo reported. Charles Koch calmly explained to them why their offer made no sense. His company was breathtakingly profitable. It operated in vital, deeply complex corners of the American energy industry. During the 1980s, Koch Industries was the largest purchaser and transporter of U.S. crude oil. It owned an oil refinery. It employed teams of commodity traders who bought and sold a wildly diverse menu of raw materials and financial products, from gasoline to paper futures contracts. This might have encouraged most CEOs to take their company public. Koch Industries, however, did not want outsiders to know how much money its traders were earning. Taking the company public would expose too many of its secrets. The memo said, certain of Koch's commodity traders are particularly worried that their high salaries, once disclosed to the public, would be used against them by their trading partners. Secrecy was a strategic necessity for Koch Industries. Charles Koch did not want to surrender it. He also didn't want to surrender control. He had a specific, clear vision of how to run his company, and he didn't need Wall Street investors to interfere. If the bankers expected Charles Koch to go along with the conventional wisdom of their time, then they, like so many outsiders, did not understand him. Beneath his low-key veneer, Charles Koch was, at his core, a fighter. He had unmovable ideas about how things should be, and he did not back down when challenged. When he was challenged by his own brothers for control of Koch Industries, he fought them in a bitter legal battle that lasted decades. When he was challenged by members of a powerful labor union during his first years as CEO, he fought them even as they committed an act of industrial sabotage that nearly destroyed Koch's oil refinery. When the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice launched a criminal investigation into Koch Industries' oil gathering business, Charles Koch fought them with every legal and political tool at his disposal. When a liberal Congress and President Barack Obama sought to impose regulations on the fossil fuel industry to control greenhouse gas emissions, Charles Koch fought them in ways that changed U.S. politics. In each of these fights, Charles Koch prevailed. When Charles Koch dismissed the bankers in 1981, it was just a small skirmish in the larger war to control Koch Industries. After prevailing in that fight, he created a company that was true to his vision. He avoided the snares that entangled many publicly traded companies that report their financial results to investors every 3 months. Koch Industries didn't have to think quarter to quarter. The company thinks year to year. An internal think tank and deal-making committee called the Development Group will sometimes think through a business deal on a timeline measured in decades. This long-term view made Koch more nimble where other companies stumbled. In 2003, for example, Koch Industries bought a group of money-losing fertilizer plants when no publicly traded company was willing to take the risk. Today, those plants are as profitable as a broken ATM machine that spews out cash around the clock. Unlike publicly traded companies, Koch Industries does not pay out rich dividends to investors. Charles Koch insists on reinvesting at least 90% of the company's profits, fueling its constant expansion. This strategy laid the foundation for decades of continuous growth. Koch Industries expanded continuously by purchasing other companies and branching out into new industries. It specialized in the kind of businesses that are indispensable to modern civilization, but which most consumers never directly encounter. The company is embedded in the hidden infrastructure of everyday life. Millions of people use Coke's products without ever seeing Coke's name attached. Coke refines and distributes fossil fuels, from gasoline to jet fuel, on which the global economy is dependent. Coke is the world's third largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer, which is the cornerstone of our modern food system. Coke makes the synthetic.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Wednesday. A lot going on today in the news and on our program. Congressman Pocan will be with us in just a second for our National Progressive Townhall Meeting. Anita Hill, Professor Anita Hill, will be with us for the first half hour of the next hour. She's got a new book out called Believing, and we're going to do a deep dive into that. Professor Richard Wolff will also be with us about, what's the deal with the debt ceiling and the Treasury and trillion-dollar coins and all kinds of stuff. In our third hour, Chuck Collins is going to drop by. He's deep into the Pandora papers. Lifestyles of the rich and mind-bogglingly rich. And also a GOP Women's Club leader rants about cancel culture. And because she was praising slavery and the GOP dumped her. Really? And at the moment, the breaking news right now is that there is a school shooting going on in a Texas high school. Amy Vanderpool over at her Shiro newsletter notes, last week there were 12 separate mass shootings in the United States. 9 people killed, 51 injured. In Seattle, Oakland, Chicago, Manhattan, Minneapolis, Chicago, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, Washington, D.C., and Aurora, Colorado. This is another one. So, all that said, it is time for Middays with Mark, Congressman Mark Pocan, our old buddy from the Congressional Progressive Caucus, a former co-chair of that caucus, and in fact, a member and former, as I said, former co-chair of that. He's also on the Appropriations, Education, and Labor Committees in the House of Representatives. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House. Pocan, Pocan.house.gov is his website. His Twitter handle is Rep. Mark Pocan. And Congressman Pocan, welcome back to the program. I'm curious what's at the top of your list. I'm guessing it has something to do with the debt ceiling and the reconciliation bills.
You got it. Exactly, Tom. Good to see you. First off, it's really more of a Senate-held problem at this point on the debt ceiling, I think, with Republicans simply refusing to do anything. We've been able to pass bills out of the House around it, but there's a real hard date coming up on October 18th, and I worry that this is the first time ever you've seen the Republicans not do what we've always done. We can talk more about it, but I think the other thing that you're really seeing a lot of our heavy lifting, a lot of our time going into is getting the Build Back Better agenda of Joe Biden done. It's a pair of twin bills coming through the House and Senate. It will be truly the biggest thing done by any Congress probably since Dwight Eisenhower or FDR, truly since that era of time. And it's important we get that done. I still think we're going to. We've got a couple folks in the Senate, maybe a handful or two in the House, but really a couple people in the Senate that we're still trying to get fully on board. But everyone else is rowing together. That's the good news. And I think we're going to have some real big benefits for the American people come through these bills.
And what's amazing is if you add up just the Bush tax cuts and the Trump tax cuts, over extending them for the 10 years that this would take, and of course the Bush ones go back, almost 20 years. That's more like 10 or 12 trillion dollars. I mean, on its face, it was, one and change for Trump and one and change for Bush. But, if you just took their short-term, consequences, it would be less than $3.5 trillion. Republicans are fine with that. They're all hysterical about this. And of course, a couple of Democratic senators.
Well, and the real fight, Tom, and I've said this, and I really want people to understand this, the real fight isn't among Democrats, the infighting. I mentioned how very few people aren't on the same page as the rest of us. The fight is between Big Pharma, which is going to be paying for some of this, and some of the big corporations, either for, the bill is paid for, so really it costs nothing. That's part of the beauty of it, but it makes corporations that often hide their profits overseas and now responsible and have to pay. And Big Pharma, because of negotiating for drug prices through Medicare, are also helping bring in some savings that help pay for these other benefits. They're the ones who are opposing it. So it's Big Pharma and the big special interests versus the Build Back Better agenda. And I think the more we explain that's the real dichotomy, the better we're being honest and representing what we're really fighting.
Yeah, absolutely. Sadly. So Congressman Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls at 202-808-9925. And let's start out here, unless there's anything else you wanted to mention before we jump to the calls.
No.
Okay. All right.
Right to the calls. Sounds
let's
great.
do it. Kathy in Seattle. Kathy, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Oh, hi there. I just wanted to ask you if you know that this stuff was going on, but I was a long-time customer of AT&T. After landline, I switched to a cell phone, so I've been with them about 40 years. So when I separated from my plan in January, I wanted to get my money back. Unfortunately, another payment had gone through on from my bank to them directly before I caught it. So they owed me $176. Well, they wanted to pay me in a card, and I said, no, I don't want a card. I paid you in cash. I want to get cash, or I want to get a check back. And all I could do was talk to people in the Philippines. It was very difficult. And I went around and around and around with them, and they didn't want to do anything but give me a card back. I finally, this is 9 months later, because they sent a card to the wrong address and it went back to them. Finally, they decided to give me a check, which I just cashed.
So, Kathy, what's your question for Congressman Pocan?
My question is, do you know that this stuff is going on and that they're keeping customers' money?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I can address a 30,000-foot level of your question, Kathy, especially around the call centers. You know, we have worked with groups like the Communication Workers of America on this. You know, so many call centers are being put overseas and in other countries in Central and South America right now. And, you know, this is part of the continued globalization efforts where they are just trying to save a nickel or dime and they make it harder on consumers. So whether it be that or whether them not want to give you a check versus a card, all of these are consequences of consolidation, and we're trying to deal with through antitrust. Because, you know, if you named what telecommunication companies you know, they're going to fit on one hand, right? And that doesn't always benefit consumers. So I'm not surprised that they don't really care enough about your business to treat you like a real consumer should be treated. But there are a number of measures in Congress we are looking at. I don't know if with a 50-50 Senate, all of them are going to breeze through, but there are absolutely members of Congress paying attention and trying to do something about it.
Omar in Herndon, Virginia. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Sir Thom Hartmann and Lord Mark Pocan, good day to you both. Mr. Pocan, I really think Joe Biden needs to start twisting some arms on the Senate floor until we hear a bone crack. And my second question is, I gave up on Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. Are there any other moderate Republican that we can convince to get Joe Biden's agenda passed? You know, i.e. infrastructure and everything else. Are there any other senators that we can plead to, like a moderate one? Thank you.
Sure, Omar. Well, first of all, let me just say Joe Biden is working very hard. The way he works is behind the scenes, very quietly. He makes a lot of calls, has a lot of meetings, but he doesn't go to the public until he needs to, and he uses that very sparingly. So don't think for a second he's not doing all the things that you would like him to do. I just saw something recently. Joe Manchin just came across that he supports Medicare negotiating for prescription drugs. So, you know, we're back down to now one person, maybe who's not on board, Kirsten Sinema. I think the people of Arizona can do the best job in putting that pressure on, honestly, because I think that does need to happen. But, you know, 48 senators and several hundred House Democrats are all rowing in the same direction. We're waiting for a couple folks in the Senate, maybe a handful or two in the House to figure out what kind of ore they want their wood made out of, and they'll be with us. I think we're going to pass these bills, but unfortunately a few folks in the Senate, knowing it's a 50-50 margin, are using that to every advantage. I do think, though, it's time for people to quit being coy. You know, I think when the President of the United States asks you what you're for, Joe Manchin started telling him what he's for, and he's negotiating like you're supposed to. We need everyone to do that because he is the president. We are Democrats working together to get a big agenda done. but it's time that everyone be working to really very transparently about what they're for so that we can get this deal done. I predict it'll happen in October, Tom. I think we're going to get it done.
I sure hope you're right, because I fear that if President Biden can't get this done, it's going to be real bad news for the Democrats, which, of course, is why, the billionaires are leaning on Sinema and Manchin, I'm guessing. Anyway, it's 15 minutes past the hour. Congressman Mark Pocan with us for the hour, taking your calls on Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program, our National Progressive Townhall Meeting.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Congressman Pocan's website is Pocan, POCAN.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. Back with your calls for him in just a moment. And welcome back, Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Congressman, do you think it would be a good idea for the president, the Democratic Party, to run ads in the state of West Virginia, to run ads in the state of Arizona, letting these people know that their senators are obstructing the Build Back Better plan of the Democratic Party? Now, I'm talking about manifestations, not articulation of vernacular. If you look at how those two people are acting, those two senators, they're obstructing what the president's agenda is. Now, I know they're Democrats, they got a big D, but they're acting like they got an R in front of their names. Now, we can laugh about invading Iraq. I think we can tell the truth about these surrogates of the devil. You got to look at how people are suffering today, and they don't seem to be sensitive to that. So my question to you is, do you think that the president should call them out in their states on TV and let the people know that they are acting like Republicans, obstructing the president's agenda, the Build Back Better plan, and we would all live better if they invested in us, but these people are holding it up. Do you think they should run their ads and call them out? And thank you.
Thank you, Morris.
Yeah, Morris, I think the president is more likely to try things first with carrots than sticks, and he's doing that. And he's now traveling the country. He was in Michigan the other day. I know he's going to Arizona. He's going to other spots that will provide, I think, the pressure you're looking for in talking about his agenda, which is extremely popular by every poll that we look at. So I think a lot of that's going to happen. I think part of the complexity is, we know generally Senator Sinema, for example, is very supportive of many of the climate change measures, but maybe Joe Manchin isn't as supportive. And we know that Joe Manchin may be a little more supportive of some of the revenue, where Senator Sinema may not. So in some cases, it's not like they have the same agenda, which is all the more why we need them to work with us, be very transparent about what they want so we can get the final details done. And the Progressive Caucus, by the way, also has things that we voted on, 5 priorities we want to make sure that are in the bill, and that's part of the meetings that we've had with the president. The good news is the president, largely, his agenda is our agenda, and we have his back through this fight. But it's not like those two senators have the exact same issues, and so each one's kind of unique, and the president is going to be traveling the country.
Steve in Phoenix, Arizona, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan. We got a minute, 20 seconds here.
Good morning, Tom. Good morning, Congressman. I'm native Madisonian here. We've spoken before. Question for you. I'm in my mid to late 60s. I've had 10 knee surgeries, sports injuries over the years, and my knees are pretty bad. When we go back to Madison, Kenosha, or anywhere in the country, I need to get like a disabled or handicapped room. And, in Madison, the DoubleTree on East Wash across from Easttown used to be the old Crown Plaza. We stayed there for years. They remodeled, but their toilets are only, in the disabled rooms, are only like 14 or 15 inches tall, the regular toilets. Same as the Holiday Inn Express in Kenosha, across from the hospital there.
So, Steve, your question.
We've got toilets in our house. You have walk-in showers in ADA rooms. Can there be a nationwide mandate for 17-inch toilets, at least for disabled toilets, uniform in all rooms across the country? Thanks, Congressman.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, Steve, you might know this part better than I do. I don't know if there's a standard right now. I'd assume there would be. I know there is by the size of the room. I just don't know about the height of the toilet, but absolutely you could make standards on anything.
We'll be back with Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. You can find his website at Pocan, POCAN.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. And we'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Hey, we have a couple of special things over at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com. Of course, at hartmannreport.com, every single day, well, 6 days a week, Sunday accepted, I write a rant about an issue of the day that I think is important. Louise and I work on these together. We get them out typically around 6 in the morning Pacific time. And you'll find that at hartmannreport.com. It's free. You can sign up for it. There's no ads, whatever. But also over at thomhartmann.com, we have a video every week for the supporters of our program. And the one this week is about how Wisconsin is trying to remove, in fact, they just got permission from their Supreme Court to remove 188,000 people from the voting rolls because they haven't voted in 4 years. This highlights the importance of getting to know who is your state representative, who is your state senator, and communicating with them regularly. It's all over at hartmannreport.com and thomhartmann.com. Text fees may apply, may receive one additional text time. Congressman Mark Pocan with us, taking your calls for the hour. And David in Rifle, Colorado, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning, Representative Pocan. I was wondering, I've never heard anyone talk about the increase in tax revenue we're going to be getting just for regular people. Is there any accounting for that in your pay-fors on this bill?
Yeah, David, let me put it this way, because I think this is what you're getting at, is in the Build Back Better Act as currently proposed, as passed by the House. One, there's a tax cut for many, many Americans. 40 million American families via the child tax credit would be extended beyond the COVID relief that it was provided for years. And that's helping lift half of the children in this country out of poverty. That's a huge measure. Second, we're saving American families money via the lower cost in prescription drugs, via the child care options that no one will pay more than 7% of their income, via the community college provisions, the family medical leave, the expansion of Medicare to dental, vision, and hearing. All of those things are going to save people dollars. Third, it creates millions of jobs, including many which are tackling climate change, and the best part is it's paid for, right? That's the whole point, is through going after people who make more than $400,000 a year, corporations that often haven't paid taxes, and pharma via the negotiating for drug prices. All of it is paid for. So those are all benefits that are going to come to real working Americans finally, and I think that's why this is the biggest thing you've seen happen in decades in Congress, and why it's so important we get it done.
David in St. Paul, Minnesota, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call. Hey, I was just wondering, this ridiculous debt ceiling argument or debate that's not even a debate that's occurring because of the Republicans' reluctance. I'm wondering why if the Democrats could propose a bill, that standalone bill that says we'll repeal all the tax cuts, we'll repeal everything, and make government function at a minimal level just to have a functioning society. I don't understand, and even if it doesn't pass, make the Republicans justify, going into, supporting their tax cuts while the federal government collapses and causes a deep, worldwide recession, if it indeed that's what the implications of them doing this would be.
Sure, David. Well, the part of the problem is that's only a part of it. I mean, there's a whole lot more. It's honestly, it's a ridiculous, only Washington could love idea of having a separate vote on the debt ceiling, because it's like you signing a contract to buy a house and then every month you decide whether or not you're going to mail your payment. That's what the debt ceiling is for the federal government. So there is legislation introduced just to get rid of the debt ceiling. If we authorize expending money as a Congress, that's it. You shouldn't come back at the second vote, because all it is causes for obstructionist, hanky-panky, rather than anything of substance or of policy. So to me, that's the better approach, David, is let's just move forward and get rid of the stupid second need to lift the debt ceiling, because if we've already authorized the spending as a Congress, we're responsible for it, and having the second kick at the can is just silly.
Rich in Sedro-Woolley, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Well, you're right on topic here. I was going to propose, since, Mitch McConnell is crudely, obviously, using this debt ceiling issue to make you burn your one and only reconciliation card. Why don't we oblige him by tacking, and take a page from the Republican playbook, tack on an 11th hour amendment to the Build Back Better bill that simply repeals the debt ceiling law. Two birds with one stone.
Yeah, I can't answer if that would pass under the Byrd rule for reconciliation, what the Senate parliamentarian, the unelected person that seems to have more power than any member of Congress, would say on that. But I do think that, we are really trying to get everything done, including these important Build Back Better Act bills, along with all this. That's why I think it's all going to happen in October. So we may not have to burn an extra try potentially at reconciliation if we can get some people to agree with us. But it's just a completely silly prospect, Rich, as you said, that we're still having this vote. So I think our goal is really to get this out of the way, because it's important for the countries and for our fiscal, respect that we have and our ratings. And we want to get these big bills done because it's important for the American people, and we're moving as fast as we can to get this done in October.
Congressman Mark Pocan with us for the hour. Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program, our national Progressive Townhall Meeting, where he takes your calls for the hour. His website is Pocan, POCAN.house.gov. Rep Mark Pocan over on Twitter. And we will be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. We'll be back right after this break here at the bottom of the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Middays with Mark, with Congressman Mark Pocan. Stick around.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Homewreckers by Aaron Glantz, a Pulitzer Prize finalist. The subtitle is How a Gang of Wall Street Kingpins, Hedge Fund Magnates, Crooked Banks, and Venture Capitalists suckered millions out of their homes and demolished the American dream. It's quite a subtitle. This is from chapter 21, titled Triumph of the Homewreckers. Donald Trump took the oath of office on a chilly Friday morning, delivering an inaugural address that promised an end to the corruption and impotence that had widened America's historic wealth gap. He understood that his victory had been propelled by harnessing the public's rage and envy at having been left behind in the economic recovery, and that he promised that he would not forget it. Evoking FDR's famous Forgotten Man speech from 1932 that promised to prioritize the needs of, quote, the man at the bottom of the economic pyramid, Trump declared, quote, the forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer. Politicians had prospered, he said, but jobs had evaporated, factories closed. Quote, the establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. And while they celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little chance to celebrate for struggling families all across our land. This all changes, starting right here and right now, Trump proclaimed. Because this moment is your moment. It belongs to you. This is your day. This is your celebration. End of quote. The moment, however, belonged not to the great mass of struggling Americans, but to the new president's most ardent supporters, flamboyant businessmen who profited off the pain of the housing bust and were now poised to steer the ship of state for at least the next 4 years. As Trump reached out his hand and swore to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America, his close friend and inaugural committee chair, Tom Barrack, stood behind him, smiling in a blue scarf and black overcoat. Afterward, Barack and Trump embraced at the U.S. Capitol's inaugural platform. The homewreckers had arrived. Barack didn't take an official position in the Trump administration, reportedly turning down an offer to be White House Chief of Staff, Treasury Secretary, or Ambassador to Mexico. Roger Stone told me he could have had any position he wanted, but working for the government would have meant making a lot less money. I don't think he has the belly for public service, Stone observed. Other homewreckers had no such qualms. If they changed the rules of the game now, they could make more money later. Steve Mnuchin, by now dubbed the foreclosure king by his critics, was confirmed as Treasury Secretary. His top deputy at One West, the bank, Joseph Otting, became the nation's chief bank regulator, the comptroller of the currency. Wilbur Ross, the bankruptcy tycoon who bought Florida's Bank United, became the Commerce Secretary, charged with everything from negotiating trade deals to overseeing the U.S. Census. Steve Schwarzman, the chairman of Blackstone, became chair of the White House's Strategic and Policy Forum, a group of business leaders who were to meet regularly with Trump. Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase was named vice chair. Though the group disbanded over the summer after Trump's statement that bigotry and violence on many sides were responsible for a white nationalist killing a counter-protester in Charlottesville, Virginia, Schwarzman, along with Barack, is said to be among a small group of outsiders, including Sean Hannity, who are put directly through to the president rather than being routed through the normal communications channels. Hannity reportedly chats with Trump nightly. Schwarzman has flown on Air Force One. On February 12, 2017, less than a month into Trump's presidency, while the commander-in-chief was dining with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan at his Mar-a-Lago golf club, Schwarzman threw a massive 70th birthday bash at his Four Winds estate, barely a mile and a half away. This time, neither Donald nor Melania Trump could make it, but daughter Ivanka and son-in-law Jared Kushner did, along with Mnuchin, Ross, and a who's who of high finance and culture, from Henry Kravis, co-founder of the hostile takeover firm Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, to the fashion designer Donatella Versace. The party featured live camels, trapeze artists, fireworks, and a gondolier. Schwarzman's tennis courts were covered with Asian-themed staging. The man who'd hired Patti LaBelle to sing Happy Birthday for his 60th was serenaded by Gwen Stefani on his 70th. After Happy Birthday, the peroxide pop star took a, quote, a quick twirl with the birthday boy around a dance floor constructed inside a two-story tent where acrobats shimmied and jumped, the New York Times reported. Unlike a decade before, when Schwarzman's glorious pre-bust bash sparked condemnation from sources as conservative as the Wall Street Journal, this time the festivities sparked very little blowback. In her story, Bloomberg reporter Amanda Gordon reveled in the comparison with Schwarzman's 60th. There were some differences, though, she wrote. Remember that beautiful fur coat on Melania Trump? It was New York in February on a weeknight. This time, no bundling required, with many folks golfing and swimming all day before a balmy night and fireworks alongside a full moon. Howard Marks, the co-chairman of Oak Tree Capital, a vulture firm that had bought and flipped 3,000 foreclosures, told Gordon, quote, "The world is an uncertain place. A lot of people are unhappy with a lot of other people. There are a lot of things that people are upset about. So it's nice to have an evening where everybody's happy, harmonious, and upbeat." End quote. There was a lot of celebrating to be had. In June, the gang got together for the marriage of Steve Mnuchin and his third wife, actress Louise Linton, almost 2 decades younger than him. And then it continues from there. The book is Homewreckers by Aaron Glantz.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. It's Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Chris in Eagleton, Pennsylvania. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Hey guys, I want to know what Congressman Pocan, what are you going to do with people for disabilities and the gay community? And Tom, I love you. And Pocan, I like the work you're doing too.
Thank you, Chris.
Well, thank you, Chris. And, I think from the earlier call, too, let me give a follow-up answer. My office actually said that in a 2010 bill, there is a height standard for toilets in hotels. So as the person brought that up, I just wanted to make sure I gave the information, so there is a standard that has to be out there. And to Chris, again, I think we have to continue to make sure that we enforce and live and breathe the spirit of the ADA that passed many, many years ago, so that everyone has the full access to all the benefits that we have in society, and that includes anyone who may have a disability. So thank you for the question.
Dave in Hoffman Estates, Illinois. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Congressman Pocan. Has anybody considered drafting up a resolution or bill for those seditionists from January 6th who were veterans and for them to deny them benefits anymore and, stripping them of their benefits and charging them for the stuff that they had received because obviously they didn't believe in our government anymore, and then to give any veteran or any active duty people their dishonorable discharges so they would never get benefits.
Yeah, Dave, I'm not aware of any bill draft that way. I think most of us are just watching with, I think, good anticipation what all comes through that commission, especially with trying to bring some folks in with subpoenas. We want to get to the bottom of what happened, and perhaps some recommendations will come out of that commission, but nothing that I know of offhand has been introduced.
Mike in Whiting, Maine. You are on the air with Congressman Mark Pocan.
Yes, how you doing? Thank you, Tom, for the education.
Sure. And
it's nice to meet you, talk to you, Congressman. My question is, when they did away with the mail sorting machines, who authorized it? Why was it authorized? And how much money did the post office lose when we took those machines out and threw them away?
Yeah, I can answer, I think, two of the three questions for you, Mike. The problem is it's DeJoy and the Postal Board of Governors that essentially authorized it. DeJoy moved forward, and the Board of Governors appoints the Postmaster General, which has been one of the problems. And I know that many people on this show and many people in my district are very, very concerned. In fact, I just saw something that was concerning that, again, they're going to do some changes at the holidays, changing the price of packages now. If there's a lot of concerns I have around how they make decisions right now. I don't know if DeJoy is really the person for the moment at all at the post office, and yet we have to get a change in I believe some more boards of governors in order to have an impact over getting rid of him, which I think is exactly what needs to happen. But to your specific question, he did it. Essentially, he has that authorization via the Board of Governors. And the third question, I just don't know offhand what the cost was to that.
I believe December 8th is the magic day. That's the day that Ron Bloom, the Democrat who is a big supporter, who's on the Postal Board of Governors and is a big supporter of Louis DeJoy. He was put there by Trump, even though he's theoretically a Democrat. That's the day his term expires, and Biden can replace him, which would be December 9th, presumably. And that would break this 5-4 stalemate in favor of DeJoy right now and could flip it the other way. Can you confirm that, or do you know anything about that? I've just read about it.
No, I don't know the date, but you're right. That's what we've been waiting for, right? Because people want us to do something, and I wish if I could do something right now, DeJoy would be working at a Kentucky Fried Chicken. But I don't have that ability in and of myself. So really it is the Board of Governors, and we knew we needed the one more seat. So you probably got more information, as you often do, Tom. But December 8th, that's good news to me, because that means there's an end hopefully in sight.
Yeah, I've only read it in one source, but my recollection is it was a credible source. Like the New York Times or something. It was just kind of parenthetically mentioned in an article, and I thought, whoa, But we'll see. Okay, Chris in Woodbridge, Virginia, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Tom, how are you, Congressman? How are you? I just wanted to see if maybe you could discuss with your colleagues and on the Democratic side that the messaging could possibly be better about the child tax care credit, the monthly payments, and I'm lucky enough to get those now as well, but that these are in advance on your child tax care credit, and you will not be able to claim that in April. Not a lot of folks are CPAs and single parents, and people might be depending upon that money, might be in for a surprise in April or May.
Yeah, well, I mean, Chris, I think the bigger part to focus on is that more people now are getting it than ever been able to get it, and you're able to get it monthly and refundable, which has been part of the goals of people like Rosa DeLauro for a long time. So my guess is that what's really of concern is make sure we've got a broader number of people getting it, which is why in the Build Back Better Act we continue that. And I will also mention, Chris, you said something, and this, please don't take this the wrong way. I've heard, quite honestly, even the president say it incorrectly at times. It's the child tax credit, not the child care tax credit, because it has nothing to do with child care. That's why there's separate provisions we're trying to get done that would limit people's child care expenses to no more than 7% of their income. But there is definitely a difference, and yet I've heard that merged by a number of people. So it's not a slight to you. It's just making sure that we really focus on both, because both of those aspects are going to be huge game changers for the American people, continuing to get that assistance via the child tax credit, and then also to be able to get the benefits of child care, because if you look at any graph around the world, we provide so little towards child care compared to other countries. This really is a game changer, especially for women trying to get into the workforce.
Michael in Westerville, Ohio, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning, Tom, and good afternoon, Representative Pocan. Delighted to speak with you. All the problems that we usually talk about around healthcare, climate change, voting, infrastructure, social needs, and you, Representative Pocan, are one of 70-plus co-sponsors of a bill, the 28th We the People Amendment, that would remove the power of corporations to have the influence they do and of on elections. Yet it is not being promoted, and it seems to me that this is the one act that could make change possible. And most Americans support the fact that corporations should have less money and money should not be in politics. What would it take for you and others to get more active in sponsoring and speaking out about this important need?
Yeah, I'll tell you, one thing I think that, Michael, is worth highlighting is, I think it's been very beneficial to have a group like End Citizens United that has really worked with a lot of elected officials to get off of corporate PAC money. And now the number, and I don't want to even guess it, Tom, because I'm probably wrong, but I'm guessing it's 60 to 80, maybe 80 plus people who no longer take corporate PAC money, compared to when I first got to Congress, I think it was 3 or 2 that didn't. That's having a big impact, right? Because what we're seeing right now is, as corporations now are finally being asked to pay their fair share, yes, we have a few people still maybe listening a little too closely to those special interests, but by and large, people are supportive of these measures, and I think that is directly linked to the fact that people no longer go to corporations for money. So I agree with your point. Corporations are not people, and there's a lot more we could talk about around that. I'm not sure with this Senate, the 50-50 Senate that we have, you're going to see those provisions go forward, but I do think you raise a really valid point, Michael, which is the more we can address the issues of corporate funding, especially the PAC funding, I think we can show that there's some significant improvements because of the work of groups like End Citizens United.
Becky in North Berwick, Maine, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, I was wondering if the Medicare eligibility age was going to be lowered as part of the Build Back Better program. I know it was discussed early on, but I haven't heard anything about that recently.
Yeah, Becky, it's not in as amended by the House on the $3.5 trillion that was compromised down, don't forget, from the $6 trillion already. However, I can assure you people have not forgot about it. My good friend Pramila Jayapal and I have recently talked about some of the ideas we've advanced to the White House from the Progressive Caucus, and this is still on the list that we're putting forward.
Wilson in Gurnee, Illinois, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Congressman Pocan. Just wanting to, highlight again, how come there's not like a whole lot more emphasis being put on voting rights, versus always the infrastructure bill? Because it seems like right now the voting rights should be highlighted more, especially as we only have like the 50-50 vote in the Senate. And if we lose further due to all the voting rights and all that such being pushed by the Republicans, it seems like we're going to be in a worse spot come the midterms.
Yeah, Wilson, I can tell you it's a real simple reason, because you still need 60 votes for any voting rights changes unless you get rid of the filibuster, where the Build Back Better agenda can happen through a process called reconciliation. As long as things are fiscal in nature, you can pass it with 51 votes. Hence why we're able to still get Joe Biden's agenda done on the Build Back Better Act in a process different than how we would address voting rights.
It's 45 minutes past the hour. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour. Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program, our National Progressive Townhall Meeting. We'll be back with more of Congressman Pocan, taking your calls in just a moment. You can find his website at pocan.house.gov, Pocan, and you can tweet him at Rep Mark Pocan, M-A-R-K Pocan. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archive.
Middays with Mark. By the way, I've got a real special report over at Hartmann Report today. It's a real deep dive. Love you to check it out and give me your thoughts on it. And welcome back. Stephen in Albuquerque, New Mexico. You are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, Congressman Pocan. I really had a little bit of fear about the last administration when it came to the president's pardon power. Are we crazy? To give him pardon power? I read in a Politico article that 161 of the over 200 people he pardoned all had criminal records of some sort or another, or it's jeopardized our Constitution.
Yeah, Stephen, I think that's a much different level of debate, right? Whether or not we're going to take away any of the current powers of the presidency. I can't say that members don't have a discussion on it. I just, right now we really are 98% of the time immersed in either the debt ceiling or the Build Back Better agenda, because both hopefully have to happen in October. But there may be people talking about it, but I haven't heard anything recently around it. Tom, also, just to correct my number, my office is being especially helpful today. I appreciate it. 52 current sitting members of Congress are not taking corporate PAC money, and 156 candidates in the last cycle took the pledge as well.
That is great. That is absolutely great. Eric in Seattle, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Mark. Thank you for taking my call. Hey, mine kind of piggybacks on what Michael and the person that just spoke said. I believe that the biggest threat against democracy right now is definitely corporations and their influence in our elections and how they can get their messaging across. My question is actually with arbitration clauses. What are you in your what are you and the senators and representatives doing to remove arbitration clauses that protect corporations and not the consumer?
Forced arbitration. Yeah. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, I know that there is legislation introduced, Eric. It's not under my committee's jurisdiction, so I can't give you a complete answer on it other than I know that this is a conversation we talk about. People are signing on to things around that, but I couldn't give you a current status because it doesn't come before either appropriations or ed and labor, and I just don't know that.
Michael in Fountain Valley, California. A quick one for Congressman Pocan. We have 1 minute.
Yes, it's for Representative Pocan.
Yes.
I'm an enrolled agent, and it's been my experience that those taxpayers that qualify for the child tax credits, that they much prefer the party check at the end of the year rather than monthly checks.
Yeah, and Michael, the expansion we did is just for very different reasons to make sure that people have money every month to make their expenditures. And I can show you dozens, in fact, scores and scores of comments from people who thanked us for doing it this way. It may be great if you're someone who does taxes and you understand that part. But for real people, what we're doing right now, we want to extend because it's working so well and lifting half of the children in this country out of poverty.
Yeah, and it was a pretty critical time too, with the crash from the pandemic, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Congressman Mark Pocan with us, taking your calls for the hour. We'll be right back in just a moment. You can check out his website at Pocan, POCAN.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep Mark Pocan. We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So we've got a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com for supporters of our program about the 14th Amendment and the debt ceiling. And just kind of riddle me this one, Batman, right? The 14th Amendment reads, and I'm taking out the parts that specifically refer to pensions and bounties and for services suppressing the insurrection, because it came out of the Civil War. But the 14th Amendment reads, in part, the validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. In other words, Congress, you can't take actions that might cause the public debt not to be paid. You can't refuse to raise the debt ceiling, is how I read that. The debt ceiling, of course, didn't even exist when they wrote the 14th Amendment. That came along in 1917. But I think this is raising some really important questions, and I dig into it in this video over there. You can check it out. It's all over at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. And Chris in Madison, Wisconsin, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Representative Pocan is actually my representative.
Cool.
And my question is this. Is there any way to have a bill like the infrastructure bill broken down by state, and therefore if the senator or the representative does not vote for it, that state gets less or none of those dollars? Basically, it would allow the person's vote to directly impact the constituents, and if the constituents don't want the money, great. But if they do, they'd put pressure on their people who are representing them.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Chris. We certainly can break it out by state. The problem is I don't think we can enforce it that way because, for example, our state of Wisconsin, where we apparently have the Adams family of Senate delegations. We have the amazing Tammy Baldwin, a strong progressive, and we have Ron Johnson, who comes from the Planet Q. So, one will vote one way, one will vote the other way. What does that mean for the people of Wisconsin? That would be the difficulty, I think, in trying to do something like that. Same would be true of congressional delegations. But we can absolutely break it out and show people what their representatives are voting for or against, and hopefully that will be persuasive.
Along those lines, has anybody ever proposed a End Welfare as We Know It Act that would say that no state can take more than 1.2 more than 120% of the money that they send to Washington, D.C., or 150%, so that like Kentucky that gets $3.50 back for every dollar they send to D.C. Could no longer be on welfare that the rest of us pay for?
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever seen anything introduced like that. As you know, often a state like with a leadership like of Mitch McConnell is taking care of his state. Some states might be very small and for other reasons have a higher than ratio. I think the bigger problem that we actually are facing these days, Tom, is some of these state legislatures in these states that don't take things like Medicaid expansion. And in my state of Wisconsin, that's costing a lot of people who could use health care and costing our system by not taking that money. That's to me, the real, I think, tragedy out there, and that's part of why we're trying to fix that in the Build Back Better Act.
Yeah, totally get it. Michael in Bronx, New York, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, gentlemen. Very important question. With somebody like Kristen Sinema that is always saying no to the progressive agenda, saying no to the bills that benefit the American people, this is why we put the Democrats back in office to begin with, and then Mitch McConnell always singing his praises to her and just continuing the Republican agenda. And she doesn't want to talk to her constituents. She doesn't want to talk to her colleagues as to what she actually wants. I don't know what else is there to do to get to the bottom as to what is really going on other than issuing her a subpoena and put her under oath the same way subpoenas were issued to the likes of Matt Gaetz and Jim Jordan when it comes to investigating the January 6th Commission. Is that something that can possibly be done? Because I want some answers.
I hear you, Michael. Let me say this. I don't necessarily understand what Senator Sinema is doing exactly in how she's handling this, but I do think at the end of the day, she's not going to go back to the state of Arizona and say she's the single vote that held up affordable child care or held up lower cost of prescription drugs or held up a senior from getting dental and vision and hearing expansion. She'll come around. I just think she's got her certain things that we're going to have to resolve in getting this done. I wish she would be a little more like the other senators who are maybe, publicly being more of team players. But I think at the end of the day, she's not going to go back to Arizona and say those things, and we will get a bill.
John in Auburn, Washington. We had about a minute and a half to the end of the hour. John, you're on the air with Congressman.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Mark Pocan. My question is about the Build Back Better bill, and we all know that the number being tossed about is $3.5 billion, and we also know the big list of things that it's going to pay for. But I've never seen an actual budget proposal that shows how that $3.5 billion would be split up. And it seems like we can all read a budget, or most of us can, and what are the amounts for each of those programs?
Oh, John, that's all done. That's each committee that voted on it in the House, so that's all laid out there. Where you find that exactly, I don't know if I can tell you. I know it's out there, but that is done to the dime on the various proposals.
Maybe there should be a more accessible website or something that tells them. Anyhow, Congressman.
And honestly, sometimes even reading those things is difficult, as you know, Tom. Sometimes it doesn't make it user-friendly.
Yeah. In our final 30 seconds, what should we be paying attention to as we go into this next week or so?
I mean, this is going to be really important. If you care about this Build Back Better agenda, actually having some benefits go to working people, we have to be calling our members of the House and Senate and being heard. And also on the debt ceiling, especially with Republicans. I'm not so worried about Democrats. But, playing that game and risking the financial, terms for the United States is a big risk. People should really be active between now and the end of October on these issues.
Thank you. Congressman Pocan, it's always great having you with us. Thank you so much for dropping by today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We will be right back. It's and Professor Anita Hill is going to be with us right after this, so stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Anita Hill's new book, Believing, Our 30-Year Journey to End Gender Violence. This is from Chapter 4, The Woke Generation. On October 17th, sitting at my desk reading through some of the many stories being shared under the banner of Me Too, I felt a sense of deja vu. A similar groundswell of outrage and activism had followed the Clarence Thomas hearings in 1991, and many believed it would be a turning point, that sexual harassment and assault would finally be taken seriously by society and the courts. We all hoped that the reports of long-standing abuses in Hollywood and other industries, and the flood of stories they unleashed, would usher in a period of reckoning. All seemed to agree. Time was up, needed to be up, for sexism and its insidious chokehold on everyone's lives. Yet despite the progress made over the past few years, it's become apparent that the reckoning that has materialized has in no way matched the volume of complaints. And disappointment is mounting in those who expected me the wake-up call our government needed to address gender-based violence. The truth is, I'm not surprised. History has taught me that it'll take more than mere testimony to solve the deeply embedded problem of this form of violence. The Me Too movement did accomplish something that did not exist before 2017. It broke open public conversation about the harsh reality and pervasive nature of gender-based violence. People around the globe, aided by social media and a broadened media landscape, shared stories of sexual harassment and assault that were horrific and familiar. It also prompted a more nuanced conversation about all that falls under the gender-based violence umbrella and how it creeps into our lives at an early age, follows us from place to place. No longer could one credibly claim that the abuses a few had stepped up to complain about in courts were fictitious or overblown. One of the most troubling Me Too revelations was how often and regularly young people experience gender violence. Survivors and victims of all genders described abuse that began when they were children and continued on a daily basis in our elementary, middle, and high schools, generational wave after wave. With participants of all ages, the movement made clear that gender-based violence has existed for generations in precisely the same forms as it exists today, and that it will continue to be the case until we let go of the persistent myth that one day a generation will come along that will no longer tolerate it. It won't magically disappear any more than pollution or poverty or racism or hunger or any of the other evils that are recurring features of our human experience. I remember when it was thought that the baby boomer generation would be the one who would put bias aside, along with the violence prompted by prejudice and animus. We were the generation that criticized our parents for segregating housing, schools, and workplaces, and for tolerating glass ceilings in pregnancy or parental discrimination that blocked women's success. But though boomers preached love and peace, they largely ignored intimate partner violence in our homes, sexual extortion on work sites, and sexual assault in our schools. It's no surprise that we have now seen prominent baby boomers, including actors, politicians, and journalists, exiting the scene in shame. It is true that Gen Zers and millennials are more accepting of LGBTQ+ people, less tolerant of racism, and more likely to say that sexual harassment is a problem, according to public opinion polls. And optimists, me included, would like to believe that a new generation's thinking about differences will lead to a natural evolution of ideas and conduct in our colleges and universities, as well as our workplaces, homes, and streets. We cite promising surveys providing proof that a higher generation of Gen Zers and millennials think same-sex marriage is good for society, that people ought to avoid offending people from different backgrounds, and that online profiles that ask about a woman's gender should include options other than man or woman. We take statistics verifying that 91% of Gen Zers believe that everyone is equal and should be treated equally. We read articles declaring that because of these progressive attitudes, the youngest generation won't tolerate sexual harassment in our workplace. And thus, they represent our hope for ending gender-based violence. So we tell ourselves that we only need to wait for them to come of age or for a change of the guard, the tipping point where they will hold most government and workplace positions and can implement policies that reflect their progressive values. We also ignore the culture that the 20 and 30-year-old of today grew up in, and how it has shaped their thinking and behavior. Many millennials and Gen Zers may lean toward liberal policies and ideas, but a significant portion of them will not and do not. A 2018 Pew poll showed that only roughly 30% of both groups approved of Trump's job performance, and nearly 40% were not convinced that racial and ethnic diversity in the United States is a good thing. Big questions are yet to be unanswered. What political and social events will shape their thinking in the future? And will progressive ideas inspire action against gender violence? Or will younger generations prioritize other causes? More than polls, online activities of teens and tweens offer us a glimpse of how much we can count on a younger generation to evolve us into a society of egalitarianism. The book is by Anita Hill. It's titled Believing, Our 30-Year Journey to End Gender Violence.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. In our Conversations with Great Minds series, I'm really happy to have with us today Professor Anita Hill. She has a new book out. It's titled Believing, Our 30-Year Journey to End Gender Violence. It's extraordinary. Professor Hill, welcome to the program. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me on your program.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. It's an honor. If I could kind of start at the beginning, well, actually, I was going to start with asking you about Clarence Thomas and your testimony, but your book starts out with your story of growing up in a very large family and your mother coming from a very large. Can you tell us a little bit about essentially where you came from and how you got to where you are as a law professor and you know, this short summary of the arc of your life, if you don't mind.
Well, I grew up on a subsistence farm in Oklahoma, in northeast Oklahoma. I went away to college, to Oklahoma State University, just an hour or so from where I grew up, and then graduated from college and went to law school at Yale, which was, you know, miles away and in some ways worlds away from Oklahoma. You know, I think some of the most significant parts of what I realized when I start thinking about how I got to where I am today is really the ways that I had to adjust and adapt in my life to different locations and even change careers in a sense to get to where I am today and be able to address some of the what I think of as one of the most troubling and important problems in our society, and that's gender violence. Yeah, and your book does a brilliant job of addressing it, and I want to dig into that. And speaking, you know, apropos of that, gender violence was inflicted on you by Clarence Thomas, and I'm curious about your how that experience of testifying, I mean, disrupted your life or changed your life. What, you know, looking back on it now, what have you learned from that, as well as how did that experience affect you? Well, it affected me in that, you know, there were threats to me after the hearing. There were threats to my life, to my job, to my family, to friends and their jobs. I mean, I look back now and think about really what a terrible time it was, and great uncertainty about what my future would be, and realize how many people, including my own family members and friends and colleagues, who were caught up in it, who shared that experience and much of that pain and uncertainty with me. I'm sorry, go ahead. But no, I would just say that fortunately, in 30 years of working through that period, as well as really committing myself
to something bigger than even the 1991 hearings has helped me to put all of that in perspective and to realize that I am not alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, in that context, Red Book conducted the first national survey of sexual harassment in 1976. I believe it was 1973 was the first year that women could get a credit card or get a mortgage in America without the signature of a man, a father or husband or brother, if I'm remembering correctly. What does that tell us about how recent this recognition of gender violence in the workplace, in the family, in relationships, right across the board is?
Well, one of the things that stands out to me is the fact that, first of all, it was Red Book, a women's magazine, as they were called then, that did the survey. It was not our government. It was not, one of our big research institutes or universities. It was a magazine that really devoted the time and effort into understanding the experiences of women in the workplace. And we remember that was a period in which women were going more into the workplace, were not being making decisions or were not limited to roles in the home, but were working outside of the home. And of course, this, you would think, chronicling their experience and measuring their experience would be a priority for everyone. But that was not the case. It certainly was not the case that the government put that as a priority. And we still don't have adequate information collected by the government about the impact of sexual harassment on individuals or on our entire nation. We do have more information, but we don't have all of the information.
You were being sexually harassed by Clarence Thomas in the 1980s, as I recall?
It was early 80s.
Yeah. So was there, and I mean, this was just after Red Book just did this study, that it seemed like kind of a new thing, which is bizarre. I mean, even thinking about it in that context, how much of a cultural shift have we experienced from that point, that period of time till today? I know in your chapter on, are the millennials going to save us? The myth of the woke generation, I think, is the title of the chapter. You expressed some skepticism about that, but we've got this kind of arc here, this 40-year arc that you've been not just a witness to, but right in the middle of the maelstrom. What are your thoughts on how culture has changed or hasn't?
Right. I mean, when you positioned me in it, I was in school in the 70s, thinking about a career, and finally graduated from law school in 1980. And still, the issue of sexual harassment was not something that was part of a public discussion. So that when I experienced it, even though I was at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission for part of the time, the notion of sexual harassment as a violation of civil rights had been taken up in some court cases, but there were still these decisions out there that didn't quite understand the importance of it. The EEOC, under Eleanor Holmes Norton as chair, had put together regulations, but the enforcement of the issue was not robust. It wasn't one of those priority issues. And as a matter of fact, even after I took my first job in law teaching and was teaching employment discrimination law, in the course book that I used that was written by women, there was really like one short passage that included maybe 2 or 3 cases on sexual harassment in underemployment discrimination. So, it was not on the public landscape. And honestly, even by 1991, when I testified, there were people who said they still didn't recognize that sexual harassment was against the law, that the law had not caught up with with people, that they didn't even know that they had rights not to be sexually extorted or to have to work in a place that was riddled with harassment, and whether it's verbal or physical. So the law was out there, but it wasn't recognized and acknowledged, and there were very few processes in place throughout corporations to address it.
How much has the workplace changed? You talk about in your book about how people have reached out to you with a whole spectrum of gender violence issues, from incest and rape to workplace harassment, but specifically in this case about the workplace harassment, sexual harassment. Do you think we have really transformed that? Have we won that battle, or are we close to it?
No. Even as late as a couple of years ago, the EEOC did an investigation and they did a report and found that the problem is still rampant. That the number of claims has escalated in 1991, but the problem is still a large problem in our workplaces. When you look at the data, the most up-to-date data says that 50% of the workplace population of women, people who identify as women, have 50% has experienced sexual harassment. And so, and we also know that a large percent, maybe as much as 60% or even larger, will experience retaliation if they complain. But in fact, a minority of people who experience it ever complain.
Yeah, which is all the more the tragedy. We're talking with Professor Anita Hill. She has a new book, Believing, Our 30-Year Journey to End Gender Violence. We'll continue the conversation in just a moment. It's a part of our Conversations with Great Minds series here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back with Professor Anita Hill. Check this book out. It's really worth reading. Believing, Our 30-Year Journey to End Gender Violence by Professor Anita Hill. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with Professor Anita Hill in just a moment. Professor Hill, you write about your older brother, Albert, warning you not to drink when you went off to college. Isn't it startling that we accept this, the fact that this warning is given from brothers to sisters, is given to women when they go off to college, but not to men?
Yes, well, it's startling because that there is a certain level of sexual assault against men that we don't talk about.
Yeah, but how
men or boys will experience. I'm sorry?
No, I interrupted you. My apologies. I was just trying to illustrate how lopsided it is, apparently, that, this idea that, or the fact that women are being harassed in the workplace or could be raped on a college campus. And you're right. You're absolutely right. Men get assaulted too. I'm sorry. Finish your response.
Yeah, but let me just add to that. That is the common thinking, that we have to make sure that women protect themselves, and we put the responsibility for keeping safe on our daughters, and we don't put the responsibility on institutions where this is happening. One of the things that's really interesting now is the campus protests around the country. They typically are targeting fraternities where sexual assault has been known to happen on their campuses. But the important advancement, I think, is that this generation is understanding that the institutions, their universities, are protecting organizations like fraternities, as well as other organizations, from any accountability. And that's what those protests are about, and that's what's different. They're no longer accepting the idea that, well, if women don't drink the punch, that was what my brother said. He said, don't drink the punch because you have no idea how much alcohol is or whatever else is in it. That, they can't rely on not drinking the punch or, making sure that they're in their dorm rooms or apartments before it gets too late. And so they aren't saying, they are not buying into the notion that they have to protect themselves, that they're demanding that colleges and universities provide a safe environment for protecting everybody's right to have a college education without suffering sexual harassment and assault.
Do you think that seems to be changing? Is it not?
Well, I think that it's moving, but apparently students are still experiencing the problem.
Right.
There was, I keep referring to the different studies. The National Association of Science, Engineering, and Medicine did a study in 2018 that was released, and they looked at sexual harassment in academic settings in those discipline areas. And what they found was that the problem is still rampant, that it's still bigger in many ways than what is being accounted for by some of the statistics.
Yeah.
That it also includes places like medical schools.
We'll be right. We'll be right back in 1 minute. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Hey, we've got a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com about Big Mail-In. You heard about this? Now, I'm not talking about the George Bernard Shaw play that got made into the movie My Fair Lady and all that kind of stuff. No, this is a PR firm in France. And, when you hear from Americans that, we could never put Donald Trump in jail because only third world countries do that. France is not only not a third world country, they're our oldest ally. And they just convicted their former president for the second time of fraud and corruption around the way he was running his campaigns. Nicolas Sarkozy. They just convicted him a second time. Now, he's appealing both of them. He's, walking around with an ankle bracelet. But, I've got all the details on this video over at ThomHartmann.com. You can check it out. But, again, next time somebody says, we can't put Trump in jail, tell them, hey, France did. And welcome back. We're talking with Professor Anita Hill about her new book, Believing, our 31-year journey to end gender violence. And Professor Hill, I'm curious your thoughts on, you are a law professor, and you worked with Clarence Thomas. What are your thoughts on him now?
I made a promise to myself, and actually have heard this question over and over. I don't study Clarence Thomas. I'm not objective. So I really don't study what he does on the court. There are plenty of people who follow the court. That's their job. And there are plenty of us who teach law who don't follow the Supreme Court, so I'm not alone in that. Mm-hmm. But I'd leave the evaluation of the way he has conducted himself on the court to those who follow it.
Okay, fair enough. I'm curious, the way that you were treated by the press back in 1991, and by the public, the threats that you received and things like that. How much of that, or how would you parse out what parts of those were reactions to your simply challenging a Republican or challenging the machine or the establishment, as it were? What parts were related to your race and what parts were related to your gender?
Wow, it's hard to unpack all of that. I think they're also interconnected.
Sure.
And it really is difficult to parse out which part was gender, which part was race, which part was just that I was bucking the tide and challenging the president of the United States and his nominee. Mm-hmm. But I can say that I'm absolutely convinced that all of those were factors in the way that I was treated. And I also think that just in terms of the press, I do think in the years since then that the press has come to understand this problem and has shed a lot of light and helped raise the public awareness by reporting on cases in the press, in cases that have been going on for years but never got the kind of exposure that they're getting today. So, but I think in 1991, most of the coverage of the hearing was about political scandal and the political stakes. Very little was about the real life experiences of people who were victimized by sexual harassment. That didn't come until after the hearings. But the press was more likely to ask the question, what's the consequences of this hearing to Clarence Thomas and his career, and rarely ask what would be the consequences to me for having come forward.
Which is
and we now know that the consequences were really, really difficult and hurtful.
Yeah, very severe. We just have 30 seconds until we're going to hit a break here. When you saw Christine Blasey Ford come forward and testify, what did you think?
I was hoping that, in fact, that we could have a different process and a different outcome, quite frankly. But I thought that she was being truthful and that she was doing her duty. That is to bring relevant information about the character and fitness of an individual who was nominated to sit on the Supreme Court for a lifetime.
Yeah. Anita Hill, your book, Believing, is extraordinary. Your life, what a journey. Thank you so much for dropping by today and for writing this book as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been an honor to talk with you. And
it's really, thank you so much.
Thank you.
For
and if you talk to Andrew Young again, tell him I said hello, please. Thank you, Professor Hill.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's 27 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another.
In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had masters-slaves, feudalism had lords-serfs, and monarchy had king-subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Welcome back from Professor Anita Hill to Professor Richard Wolff. It's our Professor Day. Professor Richard Wolff is the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books. His most recent, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself. It's also available now as an ebook, democracyatwork.info, rdwolff with 2fs.com, and Prof. Wolff on Twitter. Professor Wolff, welcome back, and thank you so much for joining us again. I'm curious your thoughts on this whole debt ceiling debate and what's going on. And I know the history of this goes back to World War I. This was put into law to try to appease the people who didn't want to go into World War I or were reluctant to see it as an open-ended conflict, so that there could be some essentially regulation of our ability to spend into a war. And it just stuck around. And then also this story that Axios is reporting, that if the Republicans blow this thing up, the Treasury could just mint a couple of $1 trillion coins and pay down some of the debt that way. Tell us your thoughts on all this.
Okay. It actually goes back very, very far, because if you think about it and you go back centuries, it has always been tempting in societies where there is money for whoever runs the society, the king, the czar, the emperor, to get over hard times and difficulties by basically printing money, making the coins, printing the bills, and getting out of a difficult situation. Politicians, want to please everybody by spending money on projects, and they also want to please everybody by not charging them taxes to pay for it. And the only way to pull off that miraculous trick is to print the money yourself, because then you can spend it without having to raise the taxes. But, of course, the problem then becomes, what's the limit? If the money keeps being printed and it prints more than there's goods and services around, well, then you're going to get that classic inflation, too much money chasing after fewer than that in the way of goods and services. So that's a fear. That people don't want the inflation. So the solution was to put a limit on what the sovereign could spend. You did that in a parliamentary way by creating a Congress or things like that had to go along with the president. But then there were always those moments when you really needed to stimulate the economy with lots of money, and when the politicians couldn't dare tax people, well, then they reverted to the money printing. And then they did it sometimes indirectly by not allowing the president here in the United States to do it, but by setting up this quasi-independent thing, which in other countries is called the central bank. In our country, it's called the Federal Reserve, and making them go through a bit of a ritual so that you can't let the president directly create money, even though indirectly he can get the Federal Reserve to do it for him, which is exactly what Obama did, what Trump did, and what Biden is doing now. Well, the Republicans like to position themselves as the keepers of the flame, the ones who are making sure that the terrible inflation won't come, et cetera, et cetera. So they denounce spending beyond whatever the cap is that we have on it at any given time. They've done that over and over again. It's good publicity for them being watchful guardians and that kind of ritualistic posturing for the press. In the end, it is so dangerous for the United States not to pay its bills. And that would be what would happen if you don't let the government borrow. For example, this year, the government is scheduled to spend $3 trillion more than it takes in taxes. It has to borrow that. In order to borrow that, it has to go over the current cap, and that's what they're discussing raising so that they can borrow. If they don't, the government is going to have to decide to to whom it sends the famous letter, sorry, we were expecting to spend on you, but we're not going to be able to, thereby crushing whoever the sectors are in the society who expected to have that money spent on them. That's politically difficult, and so the game between the Republicans and the Democrats is who is going to have the fun of posturing as the great guardian, who is going to be in the hot seat of denying people the money that had been promised and expected by them. And that's really all this is. About the $1 trillion thing, that's a threat. That's the threat of the Democrats against the Republicans. If you don't raise the cap so we can't borrow, we're going to do a magic trick. The Treasury is going to create a coin, say that it's worth $1 trillion, give that to the Federal Reserve as collateral, and then the Federal Reserve will simply set up an account for the U.S. government of $1 trillion, which they can then draw against in giving everybody the check. These are simply detailed legalistic maneuvers while the two sides play around with what? Well, here's the big news. We are an economy that's on life support from the Federal Reserve. Our economy doesn't work anymore, and the government has to spend way beyond what it raises in taxes to keep it going, and the Federal Reserve has to pump more money in than ever before to keep it going. For a while, that worked, but now they can't undo what they've already done. They dare not stop the dependence of the economy because we're like an addict. You cannot suddenly stop the flow of heroin because you plunge the addict into something that could, at the very least, wreck his life, at the worst, kill him. And we're like that now in this economy. Nobody knows what to do. We've never been in quite this situation before. And what you're watching is an endless gimmickry as the people in charge try on the one hand to position themselves for political points, and on the other hand, look at each other blankly, not knowing what to do with the situation we've gotten ourselves into.
Yeah, it's a tough one. The 14th Amendment says that the debt of the United States shall not be questioned. Does that, in the circles, the economist circles that you travel in, and the political observations that you make, do you think that there's any chance that this administration might pull that out and say, we're just going to keep on writing the checks, and if somebody wants to sue us, go ahead, but we think we'll win before the Supreme Court because we believe that this debt limit, this debt ceiling law that was passed back in 1918 or whenever it was, is unconstitutional?
No, that's a level of political honesty I really don't think they're capable of. Yeah. They're going to maneuver around it. They're going to issue these coins. They're going to come up with a lot of double talk. They're going to ignore this because, in fact, it's not a question of what the Constitution does or doesn't say. The whole world depends on the U.S. dollar as what's called the reserve currency. It's what banks hold to prove to the world that they're solid, that they're solvent. Look, we have this reserve in the form of a dollar. Nothing else plays that role. Maybe the Chinese yuan will in the years ahead, but the euro certainly is not able to. The Japanese yen stopped being able to even pretend to try to do that. So if the United States were actually to default, it would shake the confidence of the entire world financial system. Even that we might survive were it not for the fact that the capitalist system we live in is on life support now, cannot possibly survive such a shock. Everybody in the game knows it. So the United States has to, basically. But here's the problem. You're stuck. Like they can't raise interest rates, even though they know they should, because we're such an indebted country that the businesses, the government, and the individuals cannot service the debt they already have if the interest rates went up. So the very thing you did to solve the problem created a new problem, which is even harder to solve. This is an economic system that is desperate now and that is casting about for one gimmick after another to keep it all going. And this is a story that it is easy to say will not end well. And I might give you a footnote. Dr. Nouriel Roubini, who was one of the few who predicted the crash of 2008 and 9. He's a business professor at the Stern School of Business in New York City. He has been back in the news saying exactly what I am saying to you now, that we have waltzed our way into a economic dead end, and the game of the politicians is mostly to pretend that that's not the case, even as it gets worse.
I've read in a couple of different places over the years, but I've never seen quantified the argument that had Reagan not cut taxes the way he did, when Reagan came into office, the national debt was $800 billion. When he left, it was $2.3 trillion. So he tripled the national debt in 8 years. And most of that was his tax cuts. And had Reagan not cut taxes, and then to compound that, had George W. Bush not cut taxes by trillions, and then to triple compound that, had Donald Trump not cut taxes, that we would still have a national debt of around $1 trillion, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. Do you know if anybody has ever quantified exactly what the economy would look like had those 3 very consequential Republican tax cuts in the last 40 years never happened?
Over the years, I have read, I wish I could bring them to mind, I can't, but I have read a few articles that made, let's call it, partial attempts to do what you just asked about. And indeed, one article I remember about what Bush did, another article about Reagan. I'm not sure whether we have that kind of thing about Trump, but my guess is we do. But we shouldn't be surprised. What you're seeing is the Republicans found a politically viable way to survive as a party. They became the party that was going to deliver to the American people something really phony, but it sounded good. We'll cut your taxes.
The tax cut Santa Clauses.
That's right. Tax cuts, Santa Claus. People were squeezed in American capitalism for the last 40 years. They wanted some relief. Being told that here's a party that will at least not raise your taxes, but maybe even cut them, that offered some kind of relief. The logical question, what happens if they cut taxes to the services you rely on, to the state of the economy? That carefully was avoided as a question the Republicans felt they needed to answer. And so you had this crazy politics of Republicans saying, I'm going to cut your taxes, Democrats saying, I'm going to give you a new program or spend more money on you. The compromise between these two, we know only too well. The Democrats acceded to the Republican tax cuts, and the Republicans acceded to the Democratic spending increases, with the result that our deficits, as you just summarized, went crazy. But that's not really a solution, because the rising levels of debt and the need to service the debt, that produces the increase in the money supply, the role of the Federal Reserve to keep it all going with endless money creation. So now you have a new problem. But, systems, when they start to go down, that's what they do. The example to see it clearer is Britain. They were going down for many of the same reasons, and they invented, the conservatives over there, the equivalent of the Republicans, they invented the fantasy story, it's all Europe's fault. If you vote to leave Europe, everything will get better. It got them into office. It keeps them in office. England is in worse shape than it's ever been, and they're just looking for the next gambit to play.
Yeah, it's amazing. Professor Richard Wolff. democracyatwork.info. Professor, thank you so much for dropping by. Great talking with you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. We'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 48 minutes past the hour. I'll be back with just a very quick riff and your phone calls right after this. And welcome back. Brian in Fort Worth, Texas. Hey, Brian, what's on your mind today?
Oh, I just wanted to correct something you had said yesterday. You were talking about your time at CompuServe, running a forum. You made the comment that CompuServe always charged people a flat rate no matter how long they were on it. And that's actually not true. They started off charging by the minute. Something I
really
took a long time paying off. Both CompuServe and AOL did it.
Oh, that's
I don't know if you recall, but they used to send out discs, like first the 3.5-inch floppies, and then when CDs.
Oh, I remember
around.
those well. Because I was a forum administrator, I had a free account, so I guess I was disconnected from that reality. They did go to a flat monthly fee though at some point, did they not?
Yeah, I think it was like around 97. It was like a year or so before AOL bought them out.
Oh wow, yeah, because I started with them in, the early 80s, as I recall. And I also ran a forum, the trade forum, where there was actually a premium forum with an actual monthly fee associated with it. But okay, Brian, thank you. Thanks for setting the record straight. I appreciate it.
No problem. You have a good one.
Yeah, you too. Nice to revisit those times too. Linda in Auburn, Washington. Hey, Linda, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Well, I was hearing about economics, and I wanted to bring up the idea. We have Bitcoins that I understand uses a lot of electricity. Well, I had the idea of green bits, something like that, where the value is connected. It could be a paper currency too, but the value is connected to indicators of health, so that if the indicators are rising, the value rises. So anyway, I have more ideas related to that, but
it seems like it might be dicey to have a currency that is pegged to something over which you don't have a lot of control. It would be hard to function in an economy knowing that your money might lose. The $10,000 you have in the bank might become only worth $7,000 next week if a report comes out that says that the country's not doing the right things with regard to its health or its environment.
Right. There would be things to figure out. Now, some state might want to try some alternative currency, or, we could try it on a smaller scale. I also would want to say that you'd want indicators of health, social health, personal health, environmental health, that I'd want to see tied to that people are working towards increasing the health, because we might see, things continue to go downhill a bit, but just for trying to make a kelp forest, for example, okay, you get points for that, so I mean, just play it like a game.
Yeah,
even.
in other words,
you don't even have to have it as a real currency, just even points, would be just helps people focus on the positive and what things are going right in the world, and that will be good in itself. You're talking about basically a social currency, and I'm with you. I think it's a great beginning point for a conversation, Linda. Is how do we create the social pressure and incentivize good behavior, and particularly at the level of the corporations. Linda, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. It's 52 minutes past the hour. I'll be back in just 1 minute. Stick around. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Over at the Thom Hartmann website, thomhartmann.com, we have the full podcasts and there's just a lot of information, and our newsletter. And the newsletter is extraordinary. It's free. Sue puts it together every day with her stack, and it's just great content. Links to every single article that I talk about on the air, and things that are peripheral to them as well. It's really worth the effort. And then, of course, at HartmannReport.com, there is my daily rant, which is typically incorporated into the program, but it's a written version of it, and that's also
something that there's no cost for that at all. So you can check that out as well. Also, we've got a new video up about the dueling memes. If at first you don't succeed, try again, or the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Schumer is going to try to do what Harry Reid did in 2013 by forcing votes. Will it work? We'll see. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. I wanted to just highlight one thing before I get back into your phone calls, and that is that at HartmannReport.com today, I published a piece that I first published 23 years ago in Spirit of Change magazine in 1998. And I was at this harvest gathering in northern Massachusetts. And it was basically a Native American, there was a group of Native American elders. There were some of us who were invited from other groups. I was there as a white elder. There was an African American guy there. There was a person from Africa actually there. There was a South American shaman there. But it was mostly Native Americans and a lot of young white kids. And this one guy, Frank, this Native American who was sitting next to me in the talking circle, he leaned over to me and pointed out to this crowd of kids, white kids wearing buckskin and kind of dressing like Indians, and said, "Why would you people want to do this? Why are your young people trying to imitate us? You know, you guys have been crushing us and killing us for 400 years, and now you want to be like us? I don't get it. What's going on here?" And I pondered that and ended up writing a speech, basically, that I was going to give. And it turned out there wasn't time for me to give the speech at that event. And so I just published it at Spirit of Change magazine and today reprinted it because it's about how cultures get torn apart and the history of culture. And it's a real deep dive. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. You can comment on it if you sign up over at HartmannReport.com. But I think you'll find it really fascinating. I've put a lot of work and a lot of thought into this, and it goes back to basically this consistent message that we have seen throughout history of these younger cultures emerging largely out of agricultural societies and destroying older hunter-gatherer societies, and at the same time that they destroy those societies and those cultures and steal their languages and everything, they also lose their knowledge of how to live in a sustainable fashion in the world, among other things. So check it out. It's over at HartmannReport.com. We'll be back on the other side of this break. We're going to check in with Chuck Collins real quickly about the Pandora papers, and then about 15 minutes past the hour, I'll be picking up your phone calls on the other side of this break. So stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided, by the secret hope of discovering, beyond the pleasant wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. On the line with us is the senior scholar at the Institute for Policy Studies, one of the really, truly great progressive think tanks out there, the director of the Institute for Policy Studies program on inequality and the common good, and the co-editor of inequality.org, the author of the new book, The Wealth Hoarders, Chuck Collins. And Chuck, welcome back to the program. It's been a while since we've talked, and so happy to have you back. These papers, they're being coined the, no pun intended, the Pandora papers. This is pretty shocking stuff. For people who haven't been following what's going on with the Pandora papers, you want to start at the beginning and tell us what is going on, how this all came out, and what they tell us about the world's financial system and the morbidly rich.
Yeah. Well, the Pandora papers are a result of a leak. And people may remember 5.5 years ago, there was something called the Panama Papers, which was a leak out of one law firm in Panama that created all kinds of shell companies that the super rich used to sort of hide their money. Well, the Pandora Papers is a massive leak from 14 different kind of wealth service firms from around the world, and it names names. There's 360 major politicians from different countries. It shows the sort of how the systems work, how the super rich kind of play shell games using anonymous shell companies and trusts and offshore banking and the whole bit. But one of the biggest important findings is the United States is one of the biggest tax havens now. So billionaires and criminals bring their money to the United States and park it here because of our weak transparency systems.
It's truly remarkable. South Dakota being at the top of that list. I want to dig into that. But the two things that really surprised me as I was reading the reporting on this was, number one, that there were no American billionaires on there. I was surprised, or even just mind-bogglingly wealthy individuals. And is that because this is principally a scheme that was working for foreigners? Because there's certainly a lot of money being put into South Dakota.
Yeah, Tom, the reason we don't see a lot of U.S. names is because the wealth service firms that leak the money are not places where the super rich in the U.S. go. They don't go to Cyprus or, Belize to do their financial services.
So these are all overseas sources.
So we don't have a leak from a U.S. wealth advisory firm. I should say that would be really helpful to helping explain how this really plays out in the United States. So if there's anybody working in those companies and they want to send me some information, I'm available. But in all seriousness, there's the super rich and billionaires from the U.S. use the same tools that are exposed here. They use offshore bank accounts. They use anonymous shell companies. They use trusts that are sort of rigged to favor the rich. They use all the same tools to protect and sequester their money and avoid taxes.
So what is to make this understandable to the average person, because there's a lot of technical stuff here as well. If somebody had
a $100,000 nest egg, which is, a big deal for a middle-class family or a person approaching retirement in America. Half of Americans, more than half of Americans, can't even deal with the $1,000 expense. But if somebody had a $100,000 nest egg, and they could do what rich people do with it, truly rich people, or like these papers have revealed, what would they be doing versus what must they do because they're not a billionaire?
Well, chances are they can't do the same things that the billionaires are doing. I mean, we're talking about people who typically have wealth starting at about $30 billion. They hire what's called the wealth defense industry. They hire tax attorneys, accountants, wealth managers who help them navigate this global world. And those wealth managers have a lot of expensive tools that they use to help the super rich kind of game the system. So, I'm sorry to say that your $100,000 nest egg you're not going to be able to hire the kind of
that wouldn't even pay for the first day's work from one of these wealth management companies.
Yeah, that's my hourly rate, really. Sorry.
No, I get it. I totally get it. So tell me about South Dakota. Why South Dakota?
Well, South Dakota made a decision in the 1980s that it was going to kind of change its laws to attract the trust industry. So, wealthy representatives of some super wealthy families went to the governor of South Dakota and said, hey, if you change this law that makes trusts have to dissolve after a certain period of time, we'll move all our money to South Dakota.
You want to define a trust real quickly here?
Yeah, a trust is kind of like a ownership entity. It's just a way that wealth and assets can be held. But
so it's kind of like your money bin.
It's your money bin. It's a weird form in that it, it's not like someone has a trust, they have to register it, or it's like a contract almost. You and I form a contract. So there's usually somebody who puts the money in the trust. There's somebody who's supposed to receive the money, and then there's somebody who's the trustee who oversees it. What these wealth defense industry people have done is they've kind of distorted and morphed the structure so that it puts the wealth into kind of limbo. Like, who owns it? Can this be taxed? Can that person, who ripped off their customers, how do we get the money back? Well, these trusts are designed to be impervious. So it's just an ownership system. It's complicated, but actually it's at the heart of one of the things that's broken. We need to change trust law in the United States so these manipulations can't happen.
But how do you do that when the Supreme Court has said that if billionaires want to own politicians, that's free speech, that's not corruption or bribery, and the billionaires don't want the trusts to go away?
Yeah. No, I mean, we're obviously, up again. It's a heavy lift, as they say. But, first of all, the rest of the world now is going to be kicking the U.S. rear on this topic because, we've been going around saying, hey, Guatemala, end your corruption. Hey, Caribbean islands, stop being a tax haven. And now the U.S. is the tax haven. Right. And so other countries are going to be saying to us, hey, you want to, engage in a treaty with us to get information from us? Well, clean up your house, clean up your act. The other thing is that this hidden wealth system really harms people. It's the hospital that wasn't built. It's the tax dollars that weren't paid by the super rich. It's the coddling of the criminals and kleptocrats who've stolen money from around the world and bringing it here to the U.S. So we're like the getaway car drivers, and it's fueling grotesque inequality. So it's harming the rest of society. So there is the possibility of really building that countervailing power. A year ago, Congress passed something called the Corporate Transparency Act that requires shell companies to disclose who their real owners are to the Treasury Department. Well, that's a huge first step. Yeah. And we can follow that playbook and pass national laws that will shut down this hidden wealth industry.
That is absolutely great. Chuck Collins, senior scholar at the Institute for Policy Studies, ips-dc.org.
And Chuck9921TO digit 1 is his Twitter handle. Chuck, thanks so much for dropping by and telling us all about this. Explain it all. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay, good talking with you. We'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. It's it's coming up on 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Speaking the truth, the morbidly rich would really rather you don't know all about. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Courtney in Brooklyn, New York. Hey, Courtney, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good afternoon, Tom. My concerns are right spot on with the topics with Chuck Collins and Professor Wolff. I just wanted to say that Congress should get together and basically empower the Treasury to take over the currency of the economy. So the corporations will no longer have any leverage over society. They need to forgive the debt, because if Treasury just takes over the Federal Reserve and the money printing, so the Treasury could print the money instead of the Federal Reserve, they will be able to forgive the debt and redistribute currency and wealth and cancel out any financial inequality. This is the reason why the corporate tax rate was 60 to 80% back almost 100 years ago. Before the Federal Reserve Act, it's like a historical truth, and it's like people are just it's been canceled out their minds.
Yeah,
it seems so straightforward.
No, I get what you're saying, Courtney. I think the probability of the Fed being dissolved is probably around zero. It was put into place in 1913 to prevent the regular financial panics that we had been having all the way back to the George Washington administration. About every 3 or 4 years, there would be just a massive crash, and banks would fail, and just all kinds of crazy stuff would go on. And that's when the world kind of developed this federal banking system. You could debate its value, but it seems to have stabilized our money supply, at least, the Federal Reserve.
But it seems like we're now in a place where the Treasury can take control of the currency, and all those issues that existed back then, it wouldn't happen anymore, because we're decades, if not centuries, into the future now, and we're equipped to deal with that. Plus, there's already an imbalance on the other side. They've over benefited from the Federal Reserve Act. So, yeah.
Yeah. So the $1 trillion coin is like a step in that direction of the Treasury claiming their power to, mint. I mean, the Constitution says that they can mint coins, and which is why all the coins that we have are Treasury issued, and they're actual currency of the United States. Whereas all the paper that we have in our pockets and all the zeros that are the numbers that are on your bank account are actually Federal Reserve dollars. They reflect money, created by or on deposit with, or whatever the proper phrase is, with the Federal Reserve. But I doubt it's going to happen. I mean, the news agencies right now are reporting that Mitch McConnell is offering 2 different options to Chuck Schumer. It's like, like a mafia godfather
of the corporations.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Exactly what needs to happen is what's less likely to happen.
Yeah. I'm with you, Courtney. Thank you for the call. We'll see how this shakes out. I'll be back with your calls right after this. It's 19 minutes past the hour. We'll be back in 60 seconds or thereabouts.
Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. You know, the media is pushing this crazy narrative that with regard to masks and vaccines and COVID and all this kind of stuff, that America is divided. Like, you know, half of us want masks and half of us don't, or half of us want vaccines. It's just not true. 75% of Americans have received at least one dose of vaccine. 70% of Americans think that we should have mask mandates in all of our schools. Only 17%, this is from the latest Pew studies, polling, only 17% of Americans are opposed to mask mandates in schools. And what we have is this tiny fringe that is being cranked. Now we're learning from China as well as from Russia and perhaps other countries, plus the people in, a relatively small number of people, Trump followers, who think that tearing the country apart is a good thing and somehow it'll hurt Joe Biden and hurt the Democrats in the next election. It's crazy. I got a whole video rant about this over at thomhartmann.com that you can check out. Oh, I got a crazy alert for you. This is truly crazy. Martha Huckabee, who was the leader of the Republican Women's Club of New Orleans, is very, very upset because the Republican Party there down in New Orleans and statewide, in fact, the state Republican Party has stripped her affiliation from the Republican Party. And she doesn't understand it. She had created a Facebook post, a very public Facebook post, claiming that slavery fostered hard-working ethics and love and respect. Don't you know? And it got some publicity, and it was kind of embarrassing to the Republicans that one of their own, in fact, the leader of the Republican Women's Club of New Orleans, was saying, hey, slavery was a good thing, actually. It was wonderful. And so they kicked her out. And now here's what she has to say. They identify themselves as trustworthy Republicans. However, just at the time you need their support, you know, when you're supporting slavery, they knife you in the back. They cancel you. They cancel your righteous agenda. They neutralize your momentum. Yes, we don't want momentum towards slavery. She goes on to say that this is all the result of cancel culture, and the reason the Republicans canceled her was because Democrats are infiltrating the Republican Party. Really? I don't think so. Anyhow, let me pick up your phone calls here, and we'll wrap up our conversations over the course of this next hour. Constance in Cape Coral, Florida. Hey, Constance, what's on your mind today?
Well, I have been wondering, does Edward Snowden have a knowledge of connection with Mark Zuckerberg? Because it seems to me the two of them together, one helped pave the way, and then the other one did, we know what Zuckerberg has done, disrupting all these countries, disrupting our allies. And where did Snowden run to? Russia. So this couldn't please our enemies any more than everything Zuckerberg has done pleases our enemies, and it is defiling our democracy and our sovereignty as a country of being good people that we try to be.
Yeah.
And this is like patting the way for the black market. I worry about the women of the world, and now I'm worried about the women of our country being programmed to be sex slaves. Because this Kardashian thing with these women, the body image that they portrayed to young girls from that long ago, now I don't think they particularly had anything to do with it.
That is just going crazy on Facebook. I get it. Yeah, no, Constance, thank you for the call. The thing, I think that we're talking about two separate things here. Ed Snowden revealed that the U.S. government was spying on its own citizens, and in ways that were just mind-boggling and extensive beyond anything we imagined. What Mark Zuckerberg has been doing with Facebook, and I wrote about this yesterday in my op-ed over at Hartmann Report titled, "It's the Algorithm, Stupid," and I talked about it yesterday on the program. What Zuckerberg is doing is tweaking the algorithm. The algorithm is the mathematical formula that runs kind of the software that runs, the engine that runs Facebook and any other social media system. And so you can run a social media system one of two ways. I have a Facebook account. I also have an account with, I think it's nextdoor.com or something like that. It's this thing for neighborhoods. And you know, a lot of people do. So on the Nextdoor thing, a couple of days ago, somebody in our neighborhood in Portland posted this thing that one of the local hotels was being filled with drug addicts and hookers, and it was going to be a terrible thing, and the city was paying to put these people in there, and look out, and you know, all hell is going to break loose. Now, had somebody posted something like that on Facebook, by the way, it was not true. Had somebody posted something like that on Facebook, the Facebook algorithm would have taken that post and pushed it out into the timelines of lots and lots of other people who are freaked out about crime, who are freaked out about prostitution in their neighborhoods, about drugs in their neighborhoods, and just like fed them red meat. Hey, look at this, look at this. Right? That's basically what his algorithm does. The woman who was what's her name, Frances Haugen, yesterday was testifying before Congress, just laid it out. She called it being twitchy, right, reactive. On this Nextdoor app, this Nextdoor thing, this person posted this thing, and because it doesn't push out posts to people, it just kind of sits there on a chronological timeline for the community. This morning, there were over 20 people who had gone in and said, I called the hotel and they said that's not happening. I called the city, they said that, basically it just got debunked. And there were people going, why are you saying this stuff? This is crazy stuff. Are you trying to crank people up? But see, it didn't go viral. It didn't go nuts because that Nextdoor neighbor social media site doesn't use an algorithm to pump that stuff out. Therefore, it will never be as massively profitable as Facebook. But it also will not do the kind of damage to democracies and if it was international, countries around the world, that is being done by not just Facebook, but other social media that chooses to use algorithms that drive not just engagement, but rage. And that's the problem, in my opinion. We'll be back. It's 27 minutes past the hour. Pick up your phone calls on the other side of the break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Talk media for the sane among us. Yes, there are a few of us left. We'll be back in just a minute.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
The Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from the Strip and Flip selection, as opposed to election, of 2016, 5 Jim Crows and Electronic Election Theft by Bob Fitrakis and Harvey Wasserman. This is from the chapter Part 1, page 15, Strip. The foundation of election theft is the manipulation of race as a divide and conquer strategy. It began with the first Jim Crow chattel slavery. Slavery in various forms has existed since the dawn of time, but in the colonies of British North America and then in the United States, it took on a uniquely virulent incarnation. Chattel slavery was, of course, a horrific, brutal labor system designed primarily in the American South to power a network of plantations that produced cotton, tobacco, indigo, rice, and other hot weather crops that could be grown in large fields. But it had a larger purpose here. Our peculiar institution, how the founders referred to slavery, was meant to divide black laborers from white in a caste system that would guarantee that they would never unite in rebellion. As we'll see, this originated with the infamous Bacon's Rebellion of 1675 in Virginia, in which indentured servants of both races joined forces. Plantation owners vowed to make sure that that never happened again. When the United States became an independent country, plantation owners also vowed to secure political benefits from their slaves. Thus, they wrote into the Constitution the 3/5 clause that gave slave owners additional representation for their slaves, even though those slaves could not vote.
That additional vote count guaranteed that every president from Jefferson to Lincoln either owned slaves or his vice president did, and that the Congress was strongly controlled by slave owners right up to the outbreak of the Civil War. After the Civil War, with formal slavery abolished, a Jim Crow system of racial segregation overtook the South. Enforced by the Democratic Party and its Ku Klux Klan terror wing, white landowners updated the realities of slavery to again keep blacks and whites apart. The roots of racism since 1865 has been the treatment of legally freed African Americans as something less than human, guaranteeing all whites a sense of superiority and an economic leg up. When the populist and socialist movements that campaigned most powerfully from the 1880s to the 1920s worked to overcome this separation, they were hammered by the court and electoral systems through a series of stolen elections and twisted race-based legal decisions, and the fusion of the Democratic and Republican parties in the 1917 municipal races in the Northeast. Confirmed by the Supreme Court in the 1890s, this updated Jim Crow caste system again guaranteed that blacks in the South and parts of the North would not be allowed to vote, and that they would be carefully divided from whites by caste as well as class. Since 1970, the primary weapon for suppressing the minority vote has been the third Jim Crow, the drug war. In the tradition of Bacon's Rebellion and the populist socialist upheavals, blacks and whites once again began to unite during the civil rights and anti-war movements of the 1950s and 60s. In response, Richard Nixon's Republican Party invoked the divide and conquer war on drugs. Confronted with the liberalization of the Southern Democratic Party, Nixon feared that black votes might remake America's political map. In Republican eyes, there was only one solution: disenfranchise the African American population, along with young and Latino voters who were leaning strongly to the left. In 1972, Nixon pointedly ignored a powerful report from his own Blue Ribbon Schaefer Commission on drug use and escalated the attack on marijuana and other drugs. In the 45 years since, a staggering 41 million Americans have been arrested for pot or other controlled substances. That's a number of human beings that exceeds the populations of more than 150 other countries worldwide. It has left the United States with the largest prison population in the history of the modern world, while having little or no impact on the actual use of drugs. As Michelle Alexander has shown in her landmark book, The New Jim Crow, the majority of those incarcerated have been black and Latino, with a devastating impact on our elections. Millions of these mostly young, mostly male citizens have been stripped of their right to vote, as well as their ability to maintain families, obtain work, and meaningfully participate in the political lives of their communities. All this has been by design. Once again, a new Jim Crow policy has been delegated by a ruling elite to strip our non-white population of its ability to exercise its fair share of power in our electoral process and to unite with whites in political action. In the 1890s, rising industrial interests committed the nation to a fourth Jim Crow, a course of race-based global empire. The U.S. already had a history of foreign intervention, dating to Thomas Jefferson's 1803 use of our fledgling Navy to fight pirates along the coast, the shores of Tripoli, of what's now called Libya. That was followed by the conquest of the North American continent with genocidal warfare used against the indigenous peoples who had lived here for 20,000 years. By the 1890s, when the frontier consumed, America's giant corporations began to expand overseas. They started with Hawaii, a constitutional monarchy, and then pushed into Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, and beyond. And in all cases, these interventions involved the white-ruled U.S. interfering with the political systems of non-white countries. In discussing this fourth Jim Crow, we include an extensive, though not complete, list of these interventions. It underscores the reality that our own political system has become an imperial juggernaut, with the inevitable blowback bound to obliterate any residual pretense to real democracy at home. Generally, there's been an attempt to portray these interventions as benign, meant to bring democracy, progress, and the Christian faith to third world nations. In fact, they've been largely economic in purpose, a dollar democracy to grab other people's resources. The strip and flip selection of 2016 by Bob Petrakis and Harvey Wasserman. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Welcome back. It's 34 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Dylan in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Dylan, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM.
And no problem. How you doing, Tom?
Good.
I just wanted to, so I know right when COVID happened, it sort of took our attention away from a lot of world matters that are going on. And one of them that I was always interested about was England breaking off from the EU. And I know that Richard Wolff mentioned it at the end of the segment with him. Mm-hmm. And I sort of wanted to get more information, if you happen to have it, how England is, how they're doing since they broke off, and how, like Richard Wolff said, that they're doing bad.
Yeah.
So I can have some, some firepower when the water.
The water cooler wars. Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it, Dylan. Let me give you some. First of all, the short answer is that Britain right now is experiencing a crisis. There's parts of England that don't have gasoline because they don't have enough truck drivers to get the gasoline to the gas stations, because most of the truck drivers in England over the last 20, 30 years had been immigrants from other parts of Europe where their wages were much lower, mostly from Poland and the former, Soviet countries. Because it was part of the EU, they could simply move to England and get a job as a truck driver, and they would work for much lower wages than British citizens would work for. And so the industry, many industries in England, in fact, or in the United Kingdom, had become very dependent upon cheap labor from the lower income countries in Europe, because you've got a huge spectrum. You've got, super high income Germany, you've got kind of middle income France. Well, it's also kind of super high income. Then you've got the middle income Spain, let's say, and then you've got the very low income, from Greece to Poland. And so when they did Brexit, what they said is, you can no longer come into our country just on your European Union passport. You've got to be a British citizen if you're going to work in Great Britain, or you've got to have a visa, a work permit to work here. And so that immediately, like 10, 15, 20,000 truck drivers had to leave the country and go back to Poland or wherever they came from. And the Brits were like, we've been doing this for 20 years. All the old British truck drivers have retired. We got no people. And so now they're importing people into the country to do those jobs. And it's not just the truck drivers, but that's the one that's the most obvious and that leads the BBC News almost every single day right now. Now, that's the kind of immediate little micro view of it. There's a much, much larger macro view, which is the book that I'm writing right now, The Hidden History of Neoliberalism. And what this is this goes back to the 1940s and 1950s, and this idea that animated American neoliberalism, but that also animated the creation of the European Union, which was that if we did away with national boundaries, with the exception of the ability of people to move through them, but if we did away with national boundaries and let basically businesses decide where to put their factories rather than having countries decide that, and if we just turned it into a giant one world economy, that would get us to world peace, because every country would be so interdependent with every other country that they would never want to go to war and blow up their own economy. And this was adopted, this was pushed really, really hard in the United States by Reagan, which led to the creation of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades, the GATT. Then Reagan negotiated this thing called NAFTA. Oh, actually, it was George Herbert Walker Bush who finally negotiated it. It wasn't signed into law until Bill Clinton became president, but it was Bush who put the thing together, where you had this North American Free Trade Agreement, which basically did away with the borders between the United States and Canada, the borders between the United States and Mexico, with regard to everything except human beings. Human beings still couldn't pass through those borders without permission, but money could and products could. And so factories got built all over the place. And then that was followed by the World Trade Organization and these multilateral trade deals that allowed, over the last 40 years since Reagan came into office, we have lost 60,000 factories and between 5 and 10 million jobs, depending on, and you could arguably even say 20 or 30 million jobs, because those are just the jobs from people in the factories. Now those jobs are being, the toasters are being made in China, the clothes are being made in Vietnam, et cetera, et cetera. But when the factory was there in Flint, Michigan, not only did people work in the factory, but the people who worked in the factory ate at the local diner. And so the local diner jobs, you could say, really were part of that too. So we didn't just lose the 10 million factory jobs, we probably lost 30 or 40 million jobs. And it's why, it's led to this hollowing out of the American middle class. Well, the Brits saw the exact same thing with the European Union, and the idea of the European Union was the same thing. It was this neoliberal idea that if we all get together and trade together as one unified trade bloc, then we'll never go to war with each other again. And this is, a continent that had had 2 world wars within 30 years, World War I and World War II. And they just didn't want to repeat that again. And so that's why they put together the European Union, thinking that this would be the utopian thing that would fix this. But what happened was the exact same thing that happened to the United States. The cheap labor, distorted economies. It distorted them in a slightly different way. But in Great Britain, a lot of the factories got shut down and they got reopened in Poland or in Spain or whatever. And they started importing goods from China. There's Chinese goods all over British stores now. And so the whole Brexit movement was very much like Donald Trump's and Bernie Sanders, by the way. Bernie Sanders and Sherrod Brown will tell you the same thing. I mean, they're all anti-neoliberalism, anti-so-called free trade, saying, no, countries should protect their own workers. Countries should regulate their economies in ways that protect their workers. And so that was the idea behind Brexit, was Britain for Britons. Right? We're going to bring our jobs back home, and we're going to force employers to pay a decent wage to our truck drivers, which they're starting to have to do. And, and that's what's happening. They are going to go through a period. They're going to go through a period of probably 2, 3, 4 years, maybe as much as a decade, where the economy goes back to being kind of a normal economy, where wages rise up to the point where the average British person will say, or the English person will say, oh yeah, I'll become a truck driver. Sure, that's a good paying job. I can do that for the rest of my life. I think frankly, Brexit will be a good thing for England. I realize that many of my progressive colleagues think I'm nuts in this regard, but I'm not a fan of neoliberalism or so-called free trade. Or the way the European Union, at least that part of it, was constructed, the so-called, I think it's the Schengen Agreement, if I'm pronouncing it right. So that's what's going on. Dylan, did I answer your question? Because I want to move along.
Oh, yeah, that was a lot of good information. I appreciate it, and that gives me a different view about the Brexit.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. Joe in Covina, California. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, what about that... The COVID's already taken 700,000 lives and rising.
Yes, here in the United States. The rest of the world, or the rest of the developed world seems to be getting a handle on it. But us in Brazil, we're in a world of hurt.
Anyway, and then people scream about the immigrants coming in, too many of them. How come we can't let 700,000 of them in, and then we start screaming when it's reaches 700,000. The only thing is, I don't know how many immigrants the U.S. leaves in every year or whatever. I don't know that.
Yeah, prior to Trump, we were averaging around 1 million immigrants a year, and which added a lot of vitality to our economy because there's this kind of immigrant ethos of I'm going to work my way up and make things happen, and it provided cheap labor also for a lot of industries that have become addicted to cheap labor. But the actual immigrants were not providing that cheap labor so much as were the people who are here without immigration status. Trump cut that down to fewer than 100,000 a year, I believe. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, and it's been a while since I've read anything about it. But Trump radically cut back immigration during the time that he was president. And I believe that it's going to be going back to normal, but I'm not sure where it's at right now. I wouldn't try to tie it to the loss of life from COVID. I mean, that's a disaster, and that's a disaster because Trump screwed it up so badly. And now they're trying to continue the Trump screw up so that it'll mess with the economy so that, Joe Biden and the Democrats will take the blame for it, frankly. But that's what I know about that. Al in Zanesville, Ohio. Hey, Al, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Just one little side note. I kind of took your lead, and I'm running for city council here.
Hey, good on you, Al. You want to
again?
If you want to plug your if you've got a website or anything you want to plug on the air, go for it.
I really don't. I just have a little Facebook page I go on. But this may be out of context, but I was thinking, what would happen if you could envision Anita Hill as a Supreme Court nominee.
I think it would be spectacular. Wouldn't that be ironic?
Wouldn't it? Wouldn't it?
And, you know,
that's all.
Yeah, my only caution, and I realize this may sound ageist, but I say it as an old fart myself, is that the Republican Party has made a religion out of putting people on the Supreme Court who are in their 40s or early 50s, and I think that there's some wisdom to that. Although age shouldn't be a qualifier, but given how difficult the Republicans have been making the process of putting people on the court, blocking Merrick Garland, for example, for a whole year.
But it'd still be a hoot.
Yeah, it would absolutely be a hoot. Al, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. It's 45 minutes here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
45 minutes past the hour. I hope I made that clear that NAFTA was negotiated by George H.W. Bush and his administration. It was signed by Bill Clinton. And welcome back. Ethan in Portland. Hey, Ethan, what's on your mind?
Hi. I got a historical question, something that's bothered me for ages. I'm sure it's off topic. But in the run-up to the Iraq War, Bush demanded documentation from Saddam about his weapons of mass destruction. Saddam produced a large report that apparently was vague and meandering. Bush rejected it and demanded something better. And there was a deadline. I think Saddam missed the deadline, but he did produce a report on his weapons of mass destruction. And I think that was like a Friday. And then on the Sunday, Bush said, "Oh, too late. We're going to war. You've missed your chance." And I never heard another word in the media about that report. What was in it? Could its contents have prevented the Iraq War had they been made public, or whether they were ever examined? Just wondered if you knew anything about it, or if my memory is correct here.
Well, Bush was absolutely committed to going to war. He was, I'm going to have a war. There was no doubt about that. In fact, this is Cindy Sheehan talking about that right here.
As a matter of fact, in interviews in 1999 with respected journalists and longtime Bush family friend Mickey Herskowitz, then Governor George Bush stated, "One of the keys to being seen as a great leader is to be seen as commander-in-chief. My father had all this political capital built up when he drove the Iraqis out of Kuwait, and he wasted it. If I have a chance to invade, if I had that much capital, I'm not going to waste it. I'm going to get everything passed that I want to get passed, and I'm going to have a successful presidency," end quote.
There you go, end quote. So he was going to have his war no matter what, because he saw that as the key to getting reelected in 2004, and it turns out it was. And then the other thing, Ethan, that we have to remember is that it wasn't just Saddam Hussein saying there's no weapons of mass destruction here. The United Nations sent in a weapons inspectors team. Hans Blick, who was widely respected and regarded around the world, and then here from the United States we had Lieutenant Colonel Scott Ritter, who was on this program at least a dozen times during that time, telling people what he was finding. And they were, both of them saying unambiguously to the world, not just to the United States, but, from the platform of the United Nations, there are no weapons of mass destruction in this country. None. Zero. We have looked everywhere. And Saddam Hussein gave them complete carte blanche. Now, there were a couple of places where he wouldn't let them in initially because he said these are security installations and Scott Ritter is an American and I'm not sure I trust you guys. He eventually even let them into those places. So, as Scott Ritter talked about on this program back in 20 years ago or 15 years ago. And so I don't think that
that document would have made any difference, Ethan. I think George W. Bush wanted to have his war. It was part of his reelection strategy. It was how he was going to get Social Security and Medicare privatized. And he actually succeeded in privatizing a good chunk of Medicare. About 40% of people on Medicare right now are on private plans, on Medicare Advantage plans, because of George W. Bush, and because he got that war. So, Ethan, I got to run, but thanks for the call. It's a good question. It's a really good question. But I remember those times really vividly because I don't recall. Sean, did we ever get Hans Blix on the show? I don't think we. Oh, you think we did? Yeah. We may well have. I know we had Scott Ritter on all the time. He was a regular. We'll be back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So for this week's special video, for the supporters of our program that we put up over at ThomHartmann.com, I stepped into the Wayback Machine, and it's really remarkable when you go back over what President Obama accomplished and the Democrats in the House of Representatives and in the Senate, what they accomplished between 2008 and 2010 when they controlled Congress and the White House versus everything that the Republicans blocked. I mean, the Democrats in those 2 years, they saved Chrysler, they saved General Motors, they turned 800,000 monthly job losses into job gains. They increased spending and education spending, decreased the cost of student loans, all kinds of great stuff. But then when the Republicans took over, they blocked a veterans job bill, they blocked Wall Street reform, they blocked immigration reform, they blocked political ad disclosure. And this is just a little tip of the iceberg. You can see the whole video over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you 9 minutes before the hour. Diana in Preston, Idaho. Hey, Diana. Thank you for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Well, I just wanted to say I would not discourage the children, no matter what color they are, from adopting Native American dress or ways, especially in relationship to the earth. There's an old Native American saying that I grew up hearing all my life, and that was when the white man, well, they used to say in the old days, the white man starts to adopt American, Native Americans, well, they used different terminology in those days, ways, there will be peace on earth.
That's what
I grew up hearing. So I wouldn't discourage. I lived in New Mexico in the 60s when all the hippies came down there, and we never discouraged any of them. We took them and taught them pottery and beadwork and basket making and, all about gathering. And, there were a lot of things that I wouldn't discourage. I wouldn't discourage that.
I agree with you, Diana, and that's the essence of the piece that I wrote over at HartmannReport.com today. It's called "The Lost People," and Frank, and my apologies, I can't remember Frank's last name, but he was this older Native American guy that I was sitting with at this council circle, at this talking circle, at this meeting in upstate Massachusetts in 1998, a harvest gathering. And he asked me, why are these white kids dressing like Indians? And my response was essentially because white culture is a lost culture. White culture has been stripped, and by white culture, I mean, he and I were talking in those terms. As you point out, language changes over time. I would say, arguably you could call this modern culture, Western culture, industrialized culture, whatever. But that culture has lost its connection to the earth. That culture has lost its connection to sustainability. That culture, this culture that that I'm a part of, having grown up as a white guy in the United States, and that African Americans are a part of, having grown up also stripped away from their roots. In Africa, their tribal traditions and languages and everything, and Europeans were stripped away. That has all
that has all produced a hollowness. It has produced a world full of hungry ghosts who are just robbing and raping and pillaging the planet. And if we don't learn from Native Americans, we are really and truly and deeply in trouble, because the Native American societies learned through trial and error, through making mistakes and learning from them how to live collaboratively and cooperatively with the planet. And we don't know how to do that right now.
Oh, thank you for saying that so beautifully.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you for the call, and thanks for bringing up the topic. The piece that I wrote over at Hartmann Report today, I think, is one of the most important I've written in a long, long time, and it's free. There's you don't have to subscribe. You don't have to. There's no ads. It's you just read it. HartmannReport.com. It's called The Lost People, and I encourage you to check it out. Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Yes, Tom. Lost people. We will be helping to disseminate that.
Thank you.
Good work. And I just want to get as concise as possible. Thank you. And to Courtney calling from New York earlier, he was really making the point, that he's driving home the point that they're still trying to take us backwards. And then to a previous caller who was responding to Professor Wolff, yes, there's a lot of talk about the culture that upholds whatever economy is going on. And I think that's what we're dealing with here. We're stripping away. They're still trying to strip us away. And if we don't apply cannabis to regenerating the forest and small farms, we're going to remain lost.
Yeah. I am with you, Bob, on hemp, on cannabis. And I know you've been on this hobby horse for years and years, calling into the show, and I'm with you. I'm totally with you.
Professor needs to discuss what it takes to make a sustainable economy. And if we're going to leave out cannabis, if we're going to leave it out of the discussion because the politicians don't want to talk about it, we're not doing democracy. We're not doing free speech.
Yeah, I'm with you. Bob, I got to run. Thank you for the call, though. And thank you for being with us today. What a day, huh? A lot of interesting stuff to ponder as we go forward. Let me again just suggest that you check out this piece. It's called The Lost People. It's a long read. It'll take you 20 minutes to read it. It's over at HartmannReport.com. It should be right at the top. And, as we head toward, tomorrow or Friday, if you want to comment on it, I'd love to hear your comments, because it's really a deep piece. So get out there, get active, tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you and the planet.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit ThomHartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.